Employment is not a complicated idea, and in fact up until society modernized, there was full employment. If one thinks about it, you will not come up with a single good reason for unemployment. It is important to understand why there are people who thinks it benefits a nation to have people unemployed, when such an idea goes against common sense. If an idea or belief exists that, to normal people, does not make sense, it at least ought to be looked at in a very careful way. If we were stranded on an isolated island with a dozen other people, everyone would be required to do something, indeed, everyone would want to do something, because that is the nature of people. If you were put in charge of any group of persons, would you decide the most rational thing to do, is to have a few members prevented from working? Because of the corruption of our civilization, many people have come to think of charity as akin to pity. This is made worse by TV and print ads showing sad faces, rarely clean, as if poor people do not wash often enough. Charity is not a handout. Charity is compassion that requires one to reach out and do what needs to be done, to help the other. Pity is more about what a virtuous person one is than about fulfilling the needs of someone who has fallen on hard times. If a person loses their home, they need a home. Effusive expressions of sympathy are far less important than a roof over one's head. Full employment does not take any explaining. If we encountered a tribe where everyone worked, no one would think to write a thesis explaining why everyone contributed something to the wealth of the community. What needs to be explained, and would be given attention by researchers, is how a dozen people, stranded on an island, decided one able-bodied person would not be given any work to do, being supported by the rest of the group. Things that do not make sense require more research and more words of explanation than what is logical. We have become accustomed to unemployment. We are used to seeing the state trying to decrease the number of unemployed, knowing that at some point, inflation will become so high that companies will go bankrupt in order to increase unemployment. Seriously, how more insane can things get before people wake up to the fact that something is broken in the economy? What are we trying to do that it takes destroying people's lives to achieve our goals? At this moment in time, 2020, the COVID-19 virus has shut down international trade and travel. Businesses are worried about their supply chains. Items such as soaps and medications may be in short supply because of a disease that is primarily infecting China. Consequently, businesses cannot sell to their customers and so will have to lay off workers. This gives us some insight into the problem. We work to get money to purchase goods and services. Our work creates goods and services to be purchased. Work is nothing more than a delayed way to get the goods and services we want. In a sane environment, Fred and Bill would help one another because sharing labor is the most rational thing humans can do. It is rational because each person does what they do better than the other or together what neither can do well alone. The more persons one adds to the community, the more specialization there is. More and more people learn to do one small part of the total work that needs to be done, and the community supports them because the one specialized person can do far more than one person doing all the work himself. This is all there is to an economy, in a logical sense. An economy is people working together to produce the most goods and services in the most efficient way possible. The problems we have arose when machines were developed, and the community did not have the expertise to create the machines in the way barn raising is done. The expertise was locked in one man's head and he exploited his power by forcing others to work for him or be unemployed. The capitalist is a person with specialized knowledge. He uses this knowledge to leverage himself into a position with economic power. But now people do not produce goods and services to create economic activity, they create goods and services to earn a wage. This is an important distinction. The worker works for a wage. It is immaterial what he produces, or if he produces anything at all. The capitalist hires the worker to produce a product, that is an item that can be sold for a profit. The dynamic has changed. When the capitalist can no longer sell what the worker produces, he or she is let go. The worker will remain unemployed until such time as a capitalist thinks that the labor of the worker will earn his employer a profit. Let's think this through. If I want something, I ought to be able to get it directly, from the person or group best able to supply it. In return, I ought to be prepared to supply something in the best way I can. This is just maximizing the usefulness quotient of a relationship. However, what happens if a third party inserts itself between the buyer and seller? Now, we must go through a broker or licensing agent, who has the authority to permit or disallow all purchases and sales. We cannot just buy what we want, we must pay a third party a fee to buy or sell. This may seem natural to us because of our long familiarity with the state, but it is not. It is not natural or normal because it introduces costs that produce no value. This introduction of a third party produces no value and therefore lacks use. When friends and family are in need, we do not check their credit rating before helping them. We know when the need arises, they will help those who need help in return. This might be us or someone else, it does not matter. The objective is always to increase the value of the group, and ultimately, the world. That is how things are supposed to work. The world no longer works this way because we lack faith. We do not help our friends and neighbors because we do not have faith, they will help us or anyone else. We are now paid by a capitalist to help people for a fee. This fee includes a profit that goes to the capitalist. This also is an unnecessary cost, it therefore lacks usefulness and value. The need for services may exist, but if the provider of these services cannot be recompensed for what he does, he will not service those in need. Herein lays the problem. You have no job, your neighbor has no job, you have things that need doing and he has things that need doing. You can do what he needs, and he can do what you need, but because neither of you have money, neither you nor he can pay the other for their work, so he and you both remain unemployed. We can ask, why do you not both exchange your services, one for the other? The reason comes down to a lack of trust. There is no faith, and so you both want the protection from a third party. This is often just a bank and the money it provides. To do business we need a guarantor who will broker the exchange. This is not useful. We need to eliminate non-useful elements. We need to replace the capitalist and the politician with the church. These roles only exist because we lack faith. The capitalist justifies the profits he earns by pointing to the fact that he absorbs the risk. In historic terms, a lot of production was produced by cottage industry. Capitalists created central production facilities that made the process of production more efficient and over time, introduced specialized pieces of equipment that could only be used within a large production facility. Most communities did not see a way to absorb the risk or cost itself. Many craftspeople enjoy the process of creation and resist the process of specialization. The capitalist forced people to specialize by creating centralized production facilities that tapped into the power of specialization. This created many economies of scale. The more specialized the process, the more economically efficient it is. We need to ratchet up the process of specialization to increase the level of usefulness. To allow specialization to increase to its maximal level, the community must absorb all risk. This absorption of risk requires specialization. Any community can enhance development by creating an exchange. All risk in starting a business, collecting capital or acquiring equipment is absorbed by the exchange. The capitalist is always part of a community. He cannot absorb the risk that exists when a business goes under. It is the public that absorbs the costs of a bankruptcy. The community is always the insurer of last resort. It takes a high degree of specialization to absorb shocks to the economy. In the usual scenario, investors accumulate the assets needed to start a business. Investors expose themselves to the risk of losing what they invest. Most people cannot or will not expose themselves to a threat of loss at this level. The exchange model, however, absorbs all the potential risk and threat of loss and does this more efficiently. What we seek is to be useful, that is, we strive to be of value to the planet. Truth has an economic component, because if something makes sense, it will produce results that have value to us. Value can always be given an economic correlate. Capitalism has proved effective at creating economic development, because it taps into a basic impulse, namely greed. Greed is such a powerful motivator for some persons, they will absorb risk for the chance to make a lot of money. However, if this was truly a logical way to produce economic development, it would not produce unemployment. This is a pronounced form of waste. By tapping into an even more basic and more pervasive and motivational impulse, the desire to be of use, it is possible to generate specialization with less waste and expense. A community is able to absorb risk for its members. A community is a risk-absorbing entity. By successfully absorbing more risk, more completely, a priori exchanges can liberate entrepreneurs irrespective of their educational level or experience. Exchanges increase business startup rates because they increase our ability to specialize. Imagine everyone being able to innovate without risk or threat of loss. Because communities are designed to absorb and contain risk, setting up an a priori exchange is itself a risk-free exercise. Risk is a threat of loss created by the exposure of assets to expropriation. This situation seems natural to us, but it requires a specific set of circumstances to exist. Namely, exposure to risk requires a breakdown of the community. The first precondition for risk to exist is that the source of the risk must be in a position of ownership. Ownership is not just possession. Ownership is a form of possession that is exclusive. Force can be used to deprive one of possession. But the biggest problem is when the force used to deprive one of one's possessions is legal force. The existence of a power disparity is the second precondition for the presence of risk. This power disparity may be physical or legal. The biggest disparity exists between the subject and the state. However, a third precondition for the existence of risk is when what is owned is exposed to a liability. When property is exposed to a liability, the ownership of it is not actually absolute. In most countries, ownership is always conditional. Thus, one's possessions are always exposed to some degree of risk and a threat of loss, either by the government or by agents to whom one owes a debt. Our personal possessions are less exposed to these kinds of risk than commercial assets. It is commercial assets that we will be considering here. In setting up a business, the entrepreneur often has to put even his personal possessions at risk. The lender holds a lien on one's property, which means your position as the owner of this property is put in jeopardy. If there is a lien on what you own, you no longer really own what you have, it is owned contingent upon you meeting certain specific obligations, as regards your debt. Setting up an exchange does not put your personal or commercial property at risk. There is no threat of loss that comes with setting up an exchange. All it takes to set up an exchange is a few persons, the initial number is not important. The exchange can be incorporated as a not-for-profit charitable organization if wished. This step is optional. The exchange is a legal person that represents us as a church. The exchange is given a charitable designation and mission. The mission of an exchange can be as mundane as helping women with their housework. The exchange is a program to pay women for doing housework. A priori exchanges pay everyone for the work they do, even when it is housework. If what you do adds value to the world, you ought to be paid. To create an exchange, each woman donates what assets she has that will help capitalize the exchange. Capitalizing the exchange is the process by which the exchange is equipped with the tools and equipment and supplies it will need to operate. Each client is a member and holds a voting share or common share. Each donation is compensated for with an issue of preferred shares. Preferred shares are vouchers that represent equity, or value added to the exchange. Everything provided the exchange increases the equity of the exchange and is paid for by an issue of preferred shares. Sally provides $500 worth of assets to the exchange and so receives 500 preferred shares. When a member needs work done, they hire someone through the exchange. The work done is paid for by the exchange. The exchange credits the worker's account and debits the buyer's account. Think of a community that puts all of its commercial assets into a trust account. This creates an exchange. Each contribution is compensated for by credits deposited to the donor's account. These credits are backed by the assets of the exchange. Anyone who contributes assets receives credits as compensation. These credits or preferred shares are as good as cash in the exchange. Any commercial activity that was available to people before the exchange was set up, is available to the community. Members use preferred shares as a currency to purchase the goods or services they need. All work done before the exchange was formed, continues to be done after the exchange is set up, but payments are made in preferred shares. The question that we now can ask is, why would anyone be unemployed? He or she will be buying goods and services using credits drawn on the exchange. They will be drawing down their credit account. So, as a member of the exchange, would you not access their specialization, their ability to create value? If so, you have given this person work. You are working and producing goods and services, so you want to buy goods and services. So naturally you will buy goods and services from other members. This creates employment. Every time you spend the credits you earn, you provide a job for someone who would otherwise be unemployed. This is how a community ought to work. It is how our communities work to absorb risk when they operate as a priori exchange. It is how we can eliminate unemployment.